Today's the 17th of December 2006, and we're going to pick up where we left off last time. We're talking about ethics and make some general comments on how these are seen in Buddhism. I was talking about how in Buddhism, whether something is considered to be good or bad is based not just on the criterion of whether or not it harms other beings, so that's certainly very important, but whether or not something, whether a thought or a word or an action helps us to see reality as it is, experience reality as it is. It's wholesome if it does this, and it's unwholesome if it reinforces our false notions about the world. And the primary notions we have, false notions we have, are about imagining that we live in a world that is permanent, imagining that we have a separate self, and relying on conditioned phenomena for our happiness. So that we can use this as a test for something. If we're contemplating doing something, then we can check out, first of all, whether it harms others or not, and secondly, whether it will harm us in the long run, which it will do if it reinforces these false notions we have. Sometimes the question arises, especially out of this teaching of no self, is, well, okay, if we have no personal identity, then surely we don't have any moral responsibility. If there's no one doing what we're doing, then who's responsible for it? And it's important to understand this point, that although there is no self, there is what in Buddhism is called unbroken causal continuity. We just read again from the book we were drawing on last week, Buddhist Ethics by Gunapala Dharmasiri. And he says about this, a person is made up of two types of groups of events, physical and mental. As all these groups are ever changing, the preceding events disappear, giving birth to succeeding events. Thus, the succeeding events inherit the characteristics of the preceding events. This results in a causal sequence of events. In Buddhism, it is through this unbroken continuity or coherence of the series of events that personal identity is traced. The person who lived at 9 a.m. this morning is the result of the person who lived at 7 a.m. this morning. It's a famous statement by the Buddha where he said, if you want to know your past, look at yourself now. If you want to know your future, look at yourself now. It's a very, very important teaching. If we want to know what things are going to be like on our planet in the year 2020, then we can look at what we're doing now. The planet of that time will be the result of the way we live now. There's no retribution from some kind of higher power. There's just this law of cause and effect. There is an integrity to this world that we live in. It obeys laws. That's all. No need to, when something bad happens to us, there's no need to feel guilty, because the causes for what happens now are past. They're in the past. We're no longer the person we were when maybe we planted the seeds for what happens now. But nor can we say ever, why me, when some misfortune hits. because we can be sure that there were causes to what happens now. We make ourselves. We are our own creator, the creator of our world. But at the same time as being our own creators, we're also nothing. No thing. That's our freedom. Our freedom comes out of that. Another way we can help make a decision about a certain action is to look at our motive, to be as honest as we can be about motive. The Buddha once said, "O bhikkhus, I call the motive to be the deed." What's the mind state out of which a certain action comes? The analogy used in the teachings, I'm not sure whether this is from a sutra or from a later writer. The analogy that you often hear is of contrasting the way a surgeon would use a knife versus the way a murderer would. It can be a very, very similar action, but with totally different motive behind it. And there are two aspects to it. There is the surgeon's desire to help, to heal the person, but that's also backed up by years of training, learning how to do that effectively. Skill, a great deal of skill. Contrast that with a murderer, where there's the desire to harm and a bunch of delusions, primary being the delusion of self and other. You can take the example of one of the precepts that we're going to look at a bit later, speaking of others' faults. What's the intention? That's what determines whether or not we break this particular precept. Because there are many times in our work, in family situations, in Zen training, in the world of legal affairs, where we do have to talk about somebody's faults. But if that is coming out of an impulse to help or to protect others, then we're not breaking the precept. But if it comes out of self-aggrandizement, spite, or other types of ill will, then the precept's being broken. Or out of, this is fairly common with minor forms of speaking of others' faults, it can often be a way for people to feel a sense of closeness. If you stand together against someone else, that's sort of a kind of false sense of community. A lot of gossip comes out of that place. It's important to understand that this law of karma, the law of cause and effect, when it's on the moral plane, as we've been talking about, then it's essentially a psychological law that causes shape their effects. So if you have thoughts that are greedy or hateful or delusive, they're going to generate words and actions that bear the stamp of those emotions. And the actions and words that come out of such thoughts will then reinforce those thoughts and generate more of them. And as long as our thoughts are based on a sense of self and other, then they're also going to generate anxiety, tension, insecurity. And those kinds of thoughts and actions generate habits. Or put in psychological terms, they generate complexes that underlie the habits. Came across a statement from neuroscience, recent neuroscience, that really puts this very clearly. It said in this article, neurons that fire together wire together. This is the teaching of Buddhism. That when we act out of these negative emotions, we lay down pathways in the brain. And these pathways, over time, are what make our character. This teaching is set out in the very first chapters of the Dhammapada, in 2 first verses. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Suffering follows an evil thought as the wheels of a cart follow the oxen that draw it. Our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Joy follows a pure thought like a shadow that never leaves. So we can generate these kind of vicious cycles through our greed, anger and delusion, but equally we can generate virtuous cycles. Since all of this is conditioned, it can be turned around, and through our generosity and love and wisdom, we can generate positive actions and words, which then generate peace and joy and positive habits and a character that benefits others. But all of this is still just talking about things in the relative realm. It's still all in the realm of cause and effect. And in Zen we are called upon to go beyond that, not to ignore it. Certainly it's the basis of everything we do, but we also have to see our lives and the world from a perspective where cause and effect are no longer cause and effect because they're one. They're seen as one, experienced as one. And that's what the precept teachings in Zen really help us to see clearly. They encompass both the relative world of cause and effect and the absolute world of going beyond such dualisms. I want to have a look a little bit at that when we look at these precepts around right speech. And again, these are 3. I resolve not to lie, but to speak the truth. I resolve not to discuss the faults of others, but to speak with kindness and respect. And I resolve not to praise myself and disparage others, but to speak with honesty and humility. And just say a little bit about where these come from. They have their origins in the Buddha's very first teaching, which was the Eightfold Path. And one of the strands of the Eightfold Path is right speech. And in these early teachings, this was unfolded in about 5 different aspects. It's right speech. Abstention from lying, slander, abusive speech, harsh speech, and gossip or idle chatter. So there are different ways of passing this idea of right speech. But really these are the points that they cover in different ways. a lot of attention is paid to speech because of the intimate connection between how we speak and how we think and how we experience reality. And at the same time as these two are very, very closely related, there is this ability that we have as human beings to disconnect them more than any other animal, because we have so developed our power of language, the complexity of our language. You can't say that other animals have no language, and that language itself is just a human trait, but it is fair to say that we human beings have taken it to levels of complexity that we haven't yet discovered, at least in other animals. You could say that other animals live in a particular environment. They live in the Arctic realm or the subtropical realm or whatever, and within particular niches within that. But if anything we can say about humans is that we live inside language, that habitat. And that's become more and more the case the more and more urbanized we've become. We have, through this power of language, the power to deceive ourselves and to deceive others. Any advance we make, any psychological evolutionary step that we take, as Jung pointed out, is both a step forward and creates new perils, new dangers. And one of the things that language and the complexity of our language creates is the possibility to disconnect from things as they are and to live inside a world of separate ideas about the world which are not anymore connected to the things that those ideas came out of. That's one of the fundamental delusions we have and confusions we have, is that we imagine that we're talking about the thing when we're just using the words for the thing. We mistake the word for the thing. One of the tasks that writers and poets have is to re-inject language with thingness, to speak in a way that comes close to the reality of the thing itself. It's very, very difficult to do that. Writers and poets really have this essential job of bringing us back, remaking that connection. Came across this Rilke quote that captures this. Perhaps we are here in order to say house, bridge, fountain, gate, pitcher, fruit tree, window. But to say them, you must understand, to say them more intensely than the things themselves. How do we say such things with true intensity, with true authenticity? We can learn how to do this from animals. If you look at a starling singing, you'll see that the starling sings with her whole body. Every atom of her being is caught up in that song. Same when a dog barks. Every cell of the dog is barking. But to live that way, it's a real challenge to do that. Let's look a little bit now at this fourth precept. In our version of it, it's not to lie, but to speak the truth. Aiken Roshi, in his really excellent little book, The Mind of Clover, talks about the etymological background to this precept. He says the Chinese ideographs Wang Yu and Japanese Mogo are found in combination in the title of this fourth precept and not commonly elsewhere. The etymological meaning is forgetful or neglectful words. Deriving from this root meaning, the Buddhist and secular dictionaries offer a lie, a deliberate lie, wild statements, and to tell a lie. Nakagawa Soen Roshi used to paraphrase Dogen Zenji, saying, "Don't use rootless words." It's a very good way of understanding this. Don't use rootless words. Don't let your words be severed from reality, to be severed from that which goes beyond words. He continues, thus we are cautioned to be loyal to the essence and not so much to be true to others. The byproduct of such loyalty is that we are true to others, but the inspiration is Buddha nature. When this is clear, when this is clear, then the various social and psychological virtues of truth-telling are illumined. Self-deception, deception of others, cheating, gossip, and carelessness with language are all disloyal to the peace in our heart of hearts. Words expressive of that peace are true. Silence expressive of that peace is true. Later he points out that when you don't hear the silence in somebody's words, you can be pretty sure that they're not telling the truth. We hear the noise and we know something's off. As I've said before when giving talks on the precepts, there are a number of different angles that we can look at them from, and they all are important. The first level is known as the Hinayana perspective. And Hinayana means lesser vehicle here. It's not referring to other schools of Buddhism, but rather to a particular, you could say, a little bit narrow way of viewing the precepts. Or maybe it's better to understand it as the literal understanding. And that's where we can say this precept is about simply not speaking falsely in any way. Not exaggerating, not embellishing, not telling half the story. When we do this, we compromise our lives, we diminish our lives. We also complicate them. Somebody once said that when you start to lie, you really need to have a good memory. Otherwise you get into trouble. But if you're always truthful, then you don't need to have a particularly good memory. lying also diminishes our ability to communicate, because we are not in touch with ourselves, and we tend to mistrust people when we lie a lot, because we tend to think that others are also lying. So we generate mistrust in our hearts, and of course we generate it in other people's hearts as well. But there are occasions when, if you look at it from a different angle, lying might be actually necessary. In this, we move from the Hinayana, or the literal understanding of the precept. The literal understanding of this precept would be just never say anything which is not true. But from the Mahayana point of view, or the grace vehicle, then there could be times when we might lie. The Mahayana view, we say the best way to understand this is the greatest good for the greatest number. Came across a little story which illustrates this principle. A soldier was rushed back home from the front because his father was dying. An exception was made for him because he was all the family his father had. When he walked into the intensive care ward, he suddenly saw that this semi-conscious old man with tubes coming out of him wasn't his father. Someone had made a colossal mistake and rushed back the wrong man. Much longer does he have to live? He asked the doctor. Not more than a few hours. You've only just made it. The soldier thought of this dying man's son fighting. God knew where, thousands of miles away. He thought of the old man holding on to life in the hope of being with his son one last time before he died. Then he made up his mind. He leaned forward, held the old man's hand and said softly, "Dad, I'm here. I'm back." The dying man clutched at the hand offered to him. His unseeing eyes opened to scan the surroundings. A contented smile spread over his face and remained there till he died about an hour later. So was this guy lying? On the surface of it he was, but he was doing so in the service, really in the service of a deeper truth. He was the catalyst for this man's letting go. He was really embodying a deeper truth. He was embodying the truth that really we're all related, deeply related. In those last minutes for this dying man, the soldier was his son. Another way of looking at these precepts is from the standpoint of Buddha nature, the standpoint that goes beyond lying and not lying. And this story illustrates that standpoint as well, because in that taking of the old man's hand, we can be pretty sure that the soldier didn't have any thought in his mind about lying or not lying. He was just connecting with another human being. And if we can act out of a place where there is no thought, then There's no lying or not lying. The two final ways that we look at each of these precepts, and one is called from Bodhidharma's one mind precepts aspect, and then also we look at it from the teaching of Dogen's teacher, Rujing. For this one, Bodhidharma's verse goes as follows, and these all begin the same way. They all begin, self-nature is inconceivably wondrous. Self-nature is inconceivably wondrous. In the Dharma that is beyond all expression, not speaking even a single dead word is called the precept of refraining from not speaking the truth. Self-nature is inconceivably wondrous. In the Dharma that is beyond all expression, in the Dharma that is beyond all expression, we can't ever fully express this inconceivably wondrous Dharma. Any attempt to describe it will limit it. It's one of the enduring frustrations of being a teacher, is that it's the teacher's job to talk about Buddha nature. So in effect the teacher's lying always. Always the words don't completely reach the truth. But that's the nature of the job. An alternative translation for this verse has the third line as being not preaching a single word. So, in the Dharma that is beyond all expression, not preaching a single word is called the precept of refraining from not speaking the truth. This is something the Buddha actually said about his own teaching career. He said that he had, in all his 49 years of teaching, he hadn't uttered a single word. That could be taken two ways, as being his admission that he had not said a single word of truth, but also it could be a way of saying he'd never said a single false word. He hadn't said a single word because there was nothing in his mind when he spoke. It's just an outpouring. Famous lines in the Tao Te Ching: those who know do not say, those who say do not know. Another saying: the clever speak, the stupid argue. There's a famous koan in the Mumon Khan. We looked at this one a while ago. The non-Buddhist questions the Buddha. This is where a seeker comes to the Buddha, and he's concerned about this whole matter of words and how they get us tied up. He says, I do not ask for words, I do not ask for no words. And the Buddha's response is to simply sit silently. And we're told that at this seeker had a great awakening, was deeply grateful, bowed down to the Buddha, thanked him, profound thanks for this teaching. this occurs in other places in the sutras. We have the example of Vimalakirti. His lion's roar, it's known as, sitting in silence. Eiken Roshi, commenting on this, quotes a line from the Zheng Dao Ko. It speaks in silence. In speech you hear its silence. It speaks in silence. In speech you hear its silence. If we get caught up in false speaking, our chances of hearing that silence get very remote. We lose touch with the truth and with the silence that is the basis of all truth. Say that truth has a certain ring to it, and if our mind is very noisy, we won't pick it up. Ru Jing's teaching on the precepts. From the beginning, the Dharma wheel has turned, with nothing in excess and nothing lacking. The sweet dew saturates all. Everything is true. Everything is real. So here Ru Jing presents the other side. Bodhidharma was reminding us that this Dharma is beyond all expression. But at the same time, the Dharma is expressing itself all the time. Everything is proclaiming the Dharma. The hum of the traffic, squawking of the birds, the key is to learn to listen to these teishos that are happening all the time. Even our lying and dissembling are the truth. Contain information. If we own them, accept them, see, then we can see into them. So now I just want to look a little bit at these other two precepts here, not going into all these different perspectives, but just saying some general things about these two because we don't have a lot of time left. So these last two were not discussing the faults of others and not praising oneself and disparaging others. You could say that these two are two sides of the same coin. One puts the emphasis on other, our judgmentalism. The second one puts the emphasis on self, our tendency to be filled with pride, to favour ourselves, to look more kindly on ourselves. But the key thing here is the same delusion, the delusion of self and other. From a psychological point of view, you could say that what these two precepts are pointing to is the problem of the shadow. That in our formation, as we form a self, which we all do, there are parts of ourselves that we reject and deny and try to push into the background. That's part of the mechanism of creating an ego, is we identify with the bits about ourselves that we like and we try to distance ourselves from the bits about ourselves that we don't like. And the shadow is just the perfect way of understanding this, because it is just like the way our solid body casts a shadow on the ground. The solid ego image that we have about ourselves, the solid self-image, casts this dark, shadowy doppelganger. And just like the shadow, we can't run from it. It follows us wherever we go. However much we would like it to not be part of ourselves, it is. And one of the ways that we handle that, the unavoidable nature of our shadow, is that we project it. It's projecting it onto others as the way that we kind of maintain a conversation with it while imagining that it isn't a part of who we are. Somebody called Robert A. Johnson said, "To honour and accept one's shadow is a profound spiritual discipline." The breaking of these two precepts is pretty common among people who have taken up a spiritual practice, and it's understandable. You see this, unfortunately, in spiritual communities a lot, and it becomes out of the fact that we take up a spiritual practice because we want to be good. We want to be good people, good Zen students, and that can make us feel bad because we feel unhappy with certain parts of our personality. And so we end up dwelling on the faults of others as a way of avoiding that discomfort with ourselves. Of course, this also happens in terms of nations. Classic one at the moment is projecting onto terrorists all the shadow aspects of nations. Used to be communists. We lost that one, so we had to find somebody else to project our shadow onto, our collective shadow. In preparing for this talk, I was reading some material by the Vietnamese teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, and he was talking about right speech and saying that the other side of right speech is deep listening, compassionate listening, learning to really listen to what people are really saying, even if they might be saying it angrily. The archetype for this is Kanon, the Bodhisattva of compassion, whose name, the Sanskrit name Avalokiteshvara, means hearer of the cries of the world. And Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about how to truly be heard is itself healing. Just that, to really be heard. I've seen this many times, where someone may start off relating something full of agitation and tension and pain, and if they can be really heard, at a certain point there'll be a sudden shift, and all that tension will drop away, and they'll see a way forward that they couldn't have seen before. And Thich Nhat Hanh comments that when somebody is not listened to, when they have no avenue for being heard, then they're like a bomb ready to go off. He was saying this in the mid-80s. But how how relevant this point is to us today. It can help us to understand why there are so many suicide bombers in our world. Literally, bombs ready to go off. It points to a failure in our world to listen to the pain of others, to hear that pain. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, "If only it were so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart?" Actually, this notion that we have to destroy a piece of our own heart is the problem. We don't. We don't. All we have to do is recognize in others that other side, the good, and to own in ourselves the evil, to keep it together, to hold both sides. That's our job, to hold both sides. Well, our time is up. Let me just finish with another passage from Thich Nhat Hanh. In his community, they reformulated these precepts, and here's the one that they have in their community for right speech, which gathers together many of the things we've been talking about. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and deep listening in order to bring joy and happiness to others and relieve others of their suffering. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am determined to speak truthfully with words that inspire self-confidence, joy, and hope. I will not spread news that I do not know to be certain, and will not criticize or condemn things of which I am not sure. I will refrain from uttering words that can cause division or discord, or that can cause the family or the community to break. I am determined to make all efforts to reconcile and resolve all conflicts, however small. We'll stop here and recite the 4 vows.